Have you ever asked yourself why some locally produced foods are becoming more and more expensive or simply harder to find? Have you ever asked yourself whether farmers and others in the agricultural community are using data to help them decide when to sow, when to produce, and when to harvest? Agriculture may account for only around 5% of Grenada's GDP, but the country still imports more than $60 million worth of food every year, while earning just a fraction of that from agricultural exports, most of it from nutmeg and cocoa. That makes any hit to local production a big deal for both farmers and consumers. As we look for answers, it becomes clear there are several contributing factors to the seasonal spikes in the price of local produce, and those moments when prices fall so low that farmers sometimes choose not to harvest. A major factor affecting both the final output and the consumer price is the weather, specifically rainfall, and its direct link to yields and risk. The Marketing and National Importing Board, the government's official reference point for many short crops, and the Nutmeg and Cocoa Associations, which provide data on their exports, help tell that story. Prices for basic produce in 2021 showed some crops high in stock, while others were harder to find and more expensive. An early signal of how sensitive the market is to changes in rainfall and production.
I am sure you're asking yourself, what is the connection with the weather and these prices? It's rainfall. The lack of it can have serious negative effects on farmers and finally, food security. A review of data from the Central Statistics Office shows that there is a dwindling of rainfall days. For example, in the year 2021, there were 164 rainfall days, but in the year 2021, there were just 121 rainfall days, 43 less days. How about the year 2014, when there were 129 rainfall days, while the year 2019 recorded 113 rainfall days? What is realized? As rainfall days reduce, the price of agricultural produce increase.
For a small country of just over 100,000 people, agriculture still punches above its weight. More than half the population lives in rural areas. Around 13% of jobs are in primary production, and most farmers work on very small plots. At the same time, nearly 1 in 5 people is undernourished. So when drought or flood hit agriculture, it hits both incomes and diet. The second part of the picture is where those risks are concentrated. With less rainfall, yields naturally fall first in the highest risk areas. Agricultural areas in Grenada are highly vulnerable to climate risk in the southern and southeastern parts of the mainland, the northern parts of the island and the sister islands of Carriacou and Petite Martinique. Lowland areas near the coast, including St. George's, Grenville, Guave, and Certes, are vulnerable to coastal erosion, flooding, and damage to infrastructure and agricultural systems from sea level rise and storm surges. Hilly and mountainous regions are less prone to coastal risk, but they face landslides and land degradation, especially during periods of prolonged rainfall. In other words, whether it is too dry or too wet, there are some clear zones where farmers face the greatest exposure. On top of this, climate shocks have become more intense. Hurricane Beryl delivered a major blow to Grenada's food system in July 2024, wiping out crops, destroying livestock, and leaving many farmers without a livelihood. The damage was widespread and has slowed progress towards reducing the country's food import bill, as we hear from Nisha Paul.
In response, the Ministry of Agriculture has accelerated its food security plan, distributing tens of thousands of high-yielding crop varieties, including banana, plantain, and pineapple, under a World Bank-funded food security enhancement project in a bid to strengthen year-round local production. But the wider truth is that reliable yield data for short crops is limited, making it difficult to track how vegetables and other fast-maturing crops are performing under rising climate pressure. That gap matters because these are often the crops most vulnerable to drought, pest, and water shortages, issues farmers have been reporting long before Beryl hit. Short-cycle crops including vegetables, roots, and tubers are primarily grown by smallholder farmers across Grenada. More than 80% of these farmers cultivate plots smaller than 0.2 hectares, with vegetables covering roughly 4% of harvested land and roots and tubers about 8%. Based on the 2012 agriculture census, around 600 acres were under vegetable cultivation and 416 acres under root crop. Production is mainly for local consumption and domestic markets. Export of these crops are minimal, with about 2 tons of vegetables exported in 2023. Against this shaky backdrop, Grenada's two traditional export crops are telling different stories. Cocoa production has subsided by nearly 60% since 2014, falling from 900 tons to 364 tons in 2023, according to FAO stat data. The fall reflects aging trees, soil stress, recurrent drought, and decades-old hurricane damage that was never fully rebuilt. Nutmeg, mace, and cardamoms, grouped together in FAO statistics, have moved in the opposite direction. Between 2014 and 2023, output increased from 602 tons to 714 tons, a rise of 18.6%. Production dipped in some years but peaked at over 700 tons in 2021 and again in 2023, a sign of gradual but fragile recovery after Hurricanes Ivan and Emily destroyed about 90% of nutmeg trees nearly 2 decades ago. So while cocoa is in deep decline and nutmeg is slowly recovering, together they still represent only a slice of Grenada's harvested area. The rest is made up of coconuts, fruits, grains, bananas, roots, and vegetables, many of which are just as exposed to drought and flooding, but are even harder to track in the data. Even with nutmeg inching upward, the broader picture remains uncertain. Beryl's impact, combined with chronic water shortages and weak data systems, keeps the agricultural sector exposed and makes it harder to measure the full scale of losses or the pace of recovery. The hard numbers on rainfall, risk zones, and yields all point in one direction. Grenadian agriculture is under pressure, and the margin for error is getting smaller.
Adequate information is necessary, whether it be announcing on the agriculture side, workshop, which I think do happens, but you can help maybe on the news. You give little clips, of what to expect of a coming year for a farmer. Just farmer like a bulletin that farmers can plan, accordingly with those given information.
With unpredictable weather patterns and extreme climate events on the rise, Grenadian farmers are learning that success in agriculture now depends on timely, accurate information as it does on hard work. From drought warnings to recommended planting windows, access to climate-smart guidance is becoming essential for protecting crops and livelihoods. On his farm in Westerhall, St. David, farmer Philip knows firsthand the importance of adjusting to climate change. Whether it's floods, droughts, or hurricanes, having repeatedly lost crops to the elements, he places a high value on knowing what to expect before planting each season.
Climate change, as I understand it, is basically a change in the weather pattern, change in what is going on in the environment in terms, and it affects more or less the air, the carbon dioxide, the nutrients, the more or less what happening in the rain pattern, the sun pattern.
In Maribor St. Andrew, farmer Marlon echoes similar concerns. His experiences during Hurricane Ivan and Beryl and the recent years of intense drought and excessive flooding have convinced him that staying informed is crucial for survival.
We experienced loss of crop, loss of banana, falling down, falling nutmeg trees and those stuff. We got that here. Coconut trees we lost, and so forth. So it impacted us very, very bad with the climate change issue that we have around the world and Caribbean.
These are not isolated stories. In April, a group of farmers in Ludborough, Maribor, watched their crops wither as dry weather and a cutoff in water supply destroyed their hard work. A few years earlier, in 2015, 2 farmers in Lassaget's farms were left counting their losses after heavy rains caused massive flooding on their property. Together, these experiences show how farmers in different parts of Grenada are being squeezed from both sides, by drought on one hand and flooding on the other. Meteorologists and local researchers are working to provide more accurate weather forecasts and practical guidance. Their data shows that more severe hurricanes, droughts, and floods are likely in the future, making climate-smart decision-making more important than ever, not just for policymakers, but for farmers planning their next planting cycle. Former Senator Keith Clouden has suggested crop insurance a few years ago as one way to help farmers recover from losses caused by natural disasters, recognizing that even the best information cannot prevent every loss. For many farmers, the ability to bounce back after a storm or a long dry season can determine whether they stay in agriculture or leave the land altogether. One major takeaway from these conversations is clear. Access to timely information, such as optimal planting windows, drought risk, and expected weather changes, could dramatically improve outcomes. For Grenadian farmers, knowing before sowing is fast becoming the key to resilience in a changing climate. The farmers' voices put human faces to the statistics. When Philip asks for warnings about droughts and storms, he's asking for the same rainfall records and risk maps that already exist in government systems, but in a form he can use. When Marlon talks about climate change hitting harder every year, his lived experience mirrors the downward trend in rainfall days and the growing concentration of risk in already vulnerable areas. Their stories confirm what the data is already telling us and underline what is at stake if those warnings go unheard.
Grenada's climate data and its farmers are delivering the same warning. The numbers show fewer rainy days, more intense extremes, and export crops caught between deep decline and fragile recovery. The farmers describe fields scorched by drought, plots washed out by sudden floods, and the constant fear that one storm can wipe out years of work. For the upcoming months, end of December 2025 and into 2026, does not look nice. Its prediction is reduced rainfall, and when there is reduced rainfall, we say drought.
Bridging that gap will take more than sympathy. It means turning rainfall tables, hazard maps, and yield statistics into clear, timely guidance. Know before you sow alerts that reach farmers on time, in language they can understand and use. It means backing that information with practical support, climate-resilient planting material, affordable irrigation, and crop insurance that recognizes how exposed the small island food system has become. If Grenada is to protect its cocoa heritage, secure its nutmeg recovery, and keep fresh local foods on people's tables, farmers cannot be left to guess what the climate will do next. The data already shows where the risks are. The farmers already know what is at stake. The challenge now is to put that knowledge to work before the next drought or the next barrel arrives. Pay attention to these key data as presented by Nisha Paul.
Farmers seeking guidance don't have to guess. The Ministry of Agriculture's extension offices in Grenville, Plains, Black Bay, and Lassaget provide advice on planting, crop management, and post-storm recovery. While the MNIB is being phased out and its functions gradually shift to the new Import-Export Agromart, these offices, along with the Grenada Cocoa Association and the Cooperative Nutmeg Association, remain the most reliable sources for market and field guidance. Farmers are also encouraged to stay alert to weather updates from the Met Office to plan planting and protect their crops. The 2023-2024 Agriculture Census has been completed but not yet released, so most decisions still rely on direct reports from farmers and field staff.